Alright, so let's get started. Hello and welcome everyone to week 9 of interactive live sessions for the course on Computational Fluid Dynamics for Incompressible Flows. The current course is being offered by NPTEL and is being taught by Professor Amaresh Dalal from the Department of Mechanical Engineering in IIT Guwahati. My name is Debjit. I am the TA for this course. I'm currently a PhD scholar in IIT Madras, and like every other week, we shall be solving some tutorial problems together. So, without further ado, we will begin our discussion. So, the topic of discussion of this week was different finite difference methods which can be used to solve Navier-Stokes equations in their full form and using a primitive variable approach. That is uh, the variables that we will solve for are pressure and velocity only, instead of the modified variables which we saw earlier in the previous week when we discussed about stream function vorticity formulation. So, without further ado, let's dig into the questions of this week. So, this is the first question. So, what is the primary difference between a staggered grid and a collocated grid? So, in the lectures, we saw that there are two different kinds of grids, collocated grids and staggered grids. So, what is the primary difference between them? Is it option A, the location of the grid points relative to the fluid flow? Option B, the resolution of the grid in different regions of the computational domain? Or is it C, the type of interpolation used to calculate the value of the fluid variables? Or is it option D, the number of dimensions used to represent the computational domain? Which one would it be? So if we take a look at the solution, it is option A, the location of the grid points relative to the flow field. Okay, here I seem to have messed up the colors. So this one would be the correct answer, the red one, and the green ones are incorrect. I'm sorry for this error. Okay. But anyway, so the correct answer would be the location of the grid points relative to the fluid flow. So we saw that in a co-located grid, we had something like this. And let's say we consider this cell. If we focus on this cell, all the values, that is uh, pressure, U, V, all these values are stored at the cell center. So this is how the collocated grid is. Now if we have a look at a staggered grid, here the pressure once again we have in the center, but we store the velocity, u velocity, in the uh, vertical face next to it, and the v velocity in the horizontal face uh, next to the cell center. So all the v values are stored here and all the u values are stored here in the cell faces, and in the cell center t is stored. So the location of the grid points relative to the fluid flow are the main main point where it is different. The main difference between a staggered grid and a collocated grid lies in the location of the uh, grid points where the different fluid flow components are stored. Okay, I hope that makes things clear. We will move on to question number 2 of today's session. So question number 2 is asking us what are the number of cells for U and V respectively if P has M cross N cells. So the options given are option A, M cross N for both U and V, option B, M plus 1 cross N for U and M cross N plus 1 for V, and C we have M cross N plus 1 for U and M plus 1 cross N for V, and option D we have M plus 1 cross N plus 1 for both U and V. So which one could it be? So let me explain the question. So let's say I have a domain like this and I have discretized it in this manner, and this is a staggered grid. So this is for staggered grid. So if I have m points in the x-axis and y points in the and n points in the y-axis, so the number of cell centers is m cross n, and that is where I am storing the value of p. Now my question is, how many cells would there be for u and v? Would it be option A, m cross n for both u and v, that is the same as that of p? Or would it be m plus 1 cross n for u and m cross n plus 1 for v? Or would it be m cross n plus 1 for u and m plus 1 cross n for v? Or would it be option D, that is m plus 1 cross n plus 1 for both u and v? So let's have a look at the solution. The solution is option B, m plus 1 cross n for u and m cross n plus 1 for v. So let's take the example that was given in the lecture. So we have a square section like this, and let's divide this up into, so 5 cell centers we got, and we will divide this into again 5 in that end. So pressure we store at the cell centers. How many cell centers do we have? We have 5 rows and 5 columns. So m cross n, here our m is 5, n is also 5 for p. Right. Now we will slowly start writing the things for u and v. So u we will store at the vertical faces like this, and there will be 2 such in the 2 boundaries as well. So you can see for u how many rows we got, how many columns we got. So 1 2 3 4 5 and 6, and we will look at the number of rows as well. So number of rows doesn't change, so for each cell we will use the vertical center, and we have 1 2 3 4 5. So if we do this for the entire thing, this is the location of where u would be stored in the staggered grid. So see, at the boundary also we will have to store these values in the left and the right boundaries. I'll quickly go back and draw the pressure locations as well in the cell centers. So as you can see, if you count, you will get m cross n, that is 5 cross 5, 25 points where p is stored. And if you do the same for u, you will find 6 into 5, 30 places where U is stored. Similarly, we will try to do the same for V. Let me use a different color, so we will use green over here. Use green. So V we will store in the horizontal faces, and we will have 2 in the uh, top and bottom faces as well. So V would be stored in this manner. So if we look at V, how many columns do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And how many rows do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So V would be 5 cross 6. So if we try to compare now, M was 5. So we got for U 6 cross 5. So this basically means M plus 1 cross N. And similarly for V, what we got was M cross N plus 1. So that's why option B would be the correct answer. M plus 1 cross N for U and M cross N plus 1 for V. Right? Okay. So let's move on. We will move on to question number 3 of today's session, which is asking us match the following. So we have three three options in 2 columns each, and we have to match each option with the from each column to one another. So this is related to the quantities, the physical quantities that we encounter in a CFD solution, and where do we store them in a staggered grid. So this is also in you know in relation to staggered grids. So where are these stored? U, V, and P we have in the left column, and in the right column we have cell centers, vertical faces, and horizontal faces. So this should be easy since we saw this very recently. So where are each of these variables stored? You have to match, one item from each column with the other. So once you have figured out the correct combination, you can type in the chat box, or you can unmute and answer as well. So we have 4 combinations in the options given below. The first one is A1, B2, C3. Second one is A3, B1, C2. Third one is A2, B3, C1. And the fourth one is A3, B2, and C1. Where are each of these stored? So let's have a look at the solution. The solution is option D, A3, B2, C1. We will see how to get there. So as we just now saw, the let's say the first we will look at U. So U is stored in the vertical faces. So A would be 2. Okay, I think the answer given here is wrong. Anyway, we will try to figure out the correct one. So A would be 2, and V, the velocity is stored in the horizontal faces. V, these are U. So V would be horizontal faces 3, and P would be at the cell centers. So the correct option would be A2, B3, then C1. That is option C would be the correct one. I'm sorry once again, the coloring has been messed up a little bit. So C would be the correct answer to this question. A2, B3 and C1. Okay. Moving on, we will move on to question number 4 of today's session, which is asking us which of the following is a limitation of the staggered grid. So, is it option A? It is only suitable for incompressible flow simulations. Option B, it can be only used for two-dimensional flow simulations. Option C, it is less accurate than other numerical methods for simulating fluid flow. Or is it option D, it requires difficult bookkeeping? So which one would it be? Which is the primary limitation of a staggered grid? So let's have a look at the solution. The solution is option D. It requires difficult bookkeeping. The reason is that we have to maintain, three different matrices where we store U, V, and P, and their locations are also not the same. So let's say we have only one cell where we have P stored here, U stored here, and V stored here. Similarly, we have such tree values for different cases as well. So now, if we uh, try to maintain the location of them, the location of P would be somewhere here. So in the XY coordinate, it would be somewhere here. The U would be stored here, and V would be here. Plus, we saw earlier that the dimensions of the arrays are also different. So the P array would be m cross n, the U array would be m plus 1 cross n, and the V array would be m cross n plus 1. So in this case also, while writing the loops and while storing the values, you have to be very careful, and it is a bit complicated and tricky. So that's why, and this limitation gets further aggravated if we move on to 3D. So in 3D also we store the W values in the other cell face. So that's why the entire thing, the bookkeeping part of the process becomes very difficult. And that is the primary limitation of using a staggered grid. Okay, I hope that makes things clear. We will move on. We'll move on to question number 5, which is asking us which of the following is a limitation of the collocated grid. So earlier we looked at the limitation of staggered grid. Now we look at the same for a collocated grid. So now also we have four options. So option A is it only suitable for incompressible flow simulations? Option B, it is less accurate due to use of a coarser mesh than the one considered. Option C, it produces spurious results in case of checkerboard velocity or pressure fields. Or is it option D, both B and C? So we will take a look at the answer. The answer is option D, both B and C. So uh, let's say what we do in collocated grid is something like this. So let's say I have, this is the pressure point P, this is the east point E, the west point W, the north point N, and the south point S. And here in the face we have small e, small w, small n, and small s. So if we have to find out, let's say, dou p dou x, we essentially have to do, pe minus pw divided by, and yeah, this is delta x. So we'll have to do delta x. But since we don't have the values at the faces, that is small e and small w, we have to interpolate. So for the small w case, we will take the average of these two, and for the small e location, we will take the average of these two, and essentially we will end up at you know P capital E minus P capital W divided by 2 delta x. So essentially, yeah, I can't use a delta x or delta y while calculating the pressure gradients. It would always end up into 2 delta x and 2 delta y. Similar thing would happen for dou p dou y as well. This would end up being Pn minus Ps divided by 2 delta y. So essentially we are using a coarser mesh which has the small division equal to 2 delta x and 2 delta y, where delta x and delta y are the uh, grid spacings in the actual mesh being used. So the method itself is forcing us to sort of use a coarser mesh than the one that we are considering. That is a huge loss from a computational cost point of view, and it leads to loss of accuracy as well. So that's why B is correct, and C is correct because it produces spurious results in case of checkerboard velocity or pressure fields, either of them. So this is also something that we saw in the lecture. So let's say we have you know pressure field like this, where we have 100 0 100 0 and something like that. These are the pressures. So now velocity, when we are calculating, so for calculating velocity at this cell, here we are trying to calculate u, and in that equation, the dou p dou x would come out to be, so if this is p, this is east, and this is west. So here it would, we would use pe minus p west by 2 delta x, and pe and pw both are 200, both are 100. Sorry, divided by 2 delta x. So this essentially becomes 0. So uh, for this cell here, this does not experience any pressure gradient at all. So that won't affect the velocity as well. So the pressure field does not affect the velocity field in this case. And similarly, we can reverse the situation where we have a velocity field like this. Uh, so that won't in turn affect the pressure field. So this kind of phenomena is known as decoupling. So here pressure and velocity are not talking to each other, they are not communicating with each other, they are getting decoupled, and that is undesirable because that leads to wrong solutions. In real fluid flow fields, pressure and velocity are highly coupled, they depend on each other. So this decoupling adversely affects the solution. We will get wrong solutions which are not correct. So that's why option C is also a correct option. So instead of picking either B or C, you have to pick option D, which says both B and C would be the correct answer. Okay. So we will move on. Moving on to question number 6. So question number 6 is a fill in the blanks type of question. It is asking us the staggered grid can be used to overcome dash? Is it option A, decoupling of pressure and velocities, option B, coupling of pressure and velocities, option C, interpolation problems, or option D, boundedness problems? So let's have a look at the solution. The solution is option A, decoupling of pressure and velocity. So very recently in the last slide we saw that one of the limitations of a collocated grid is the decoupling of pressure and velocities, and exactly that is overcome by staggered grids, where the, you know, let's say we have two cells like this. We have pressure P over here and PE over here, and while we are trying to calculate the U, the pressure gradient we will find as PE minus PP divided by delta X or whatsoever. So in that case, that directly communicates to the velocity what the pressure gradient is. And similarly, the opposite thing also happens. The velocity gradients are communicated to the pressure fields while solving them. So that's how this problem is overcome using staggered grids. The problem of decoupling of pressure and velocity. So option A would be the correct answer. Okay, let's move on. We will move on to question number 7 of today's session, which is asking us which of these is not stored at the cell centers in staggered grids. Is it option A, density, option B, pressure, option C, temperature, or option C, none of the above? Which of these is not stored at the cell centers in the staggered grids? Is it option A, density, option B, pressure, option C, temperature, or option D, none of the above? So let's have a look at the solution. The solution is option D, none of the above, because all these three quantities, density, pressure, and temperature, these are scalars, and all scalars are to be stored in the cell centers in staggered grids. Only velocities are stored in the cell faces. So all scalars, it could be density, pressure, temperature. Another example would be species, in case you are trying to model a multi-species flow. So all these scalars. Another example would be in a multi-phase flow, the volume fraction. All these things, they would be stored in the cell center, and the velocities would be stored at the cell faces. So that's why the correct answer to this question would be none of the above. because the question was which of these is not stored at the cell center. Since all of these are stored at the cell center, the correct answer would be none of the above. Okay, simple. So we will move on. We'll move on to question number 8 of today's session, which is asking us that in order to calculate drag and lift, which method is more suitable? Is it option A, stream function vorticity approach, or is it option B, primitive variable approach? So let's say we have an aerofoil like this, and we have a flow incoming like this, and we want to calculate what would be the total drag force and lift force. These are the true two primary forces experienced by aerofoils or any solid bodies which encounter a fluid flow around it. And these are very important in case of multiple engineering applications, be it aeroplanes, be it turbine blades, uh, or there are multiple other examples where the calculation of drag force and lift force becomes very crucial. So in order to do that, which method is more suitable? Is it stream function vorticity approach or is it primitive variable approach? So let's have a look at the solution. The solution is primitive variable approach because the main reason is in stream function vorticity approach, pressure is eliminated from the original equations, and stream function and vorticity fields are solved for. There also, if we need the pressure, we can calculate it, or you can get it back using the pressure Poisson equation, but that has to be done separately. That has to be separately calculated. It does not come out of the solution itself. Whereas in primitive variable approach, pressure itself is solved for in the main solution algorithm. So we don't need to do a separate calculation in order to find the pressure. And pressure is that pressure distribution over an aerofoil is what is required to find out the lift and drag force. So the pressure acts normal to the surface at each points, and what we do is in order to calculate the drag force, we take this this pressure force F is equal to P dot dA, and this is a vector, and we take F cos theta into the entire area in order to find the drag force, and in order to calculate the lift force we do the same. This would be P, so we do P sine theta dA along the entire area. So this would be a closed area like this. The total integral of that in the and its component in the vertical direction would give us the lift force, and in the horizontal direction would give us the drag force. So that's where the sine theta and cos theta comes from. But other than that, you need to know the pressure distribution over the solid boundary, and that can be more suitably found out using a primitive variable approach. What are the primitive variables? U, V, and P, instead of the derived quantities psi and omega, which are functions of u, gradients of u, and functions of gradients of u and v. So that's why this is more suitable. Okay, so moving on, we'll move on to question number 9 of today's session, which is asking us in MAC algorithm, how is pressure at neighboring points calculated? Is it done by option A, calculated by normal interpolation? Option B, calculated by weighted interpolation? Option C, solved using TDMA, or option D, assumed to be zero. So which one would it be? So let's have a look at the solution. The solution is option D, assumed to be zero. So that is one of the central, assumptions in MAC algorithm, and that seems to work out as well. So here so we have cells like this. This is P, this is E, this is W, this is N, and this is S. So while calculating the pressure at P, we assume that these PN, PW, PS, PE, these are all identically equal to zero, and this is some function of the uh, provisional velocities and what else came here. So delta x, delta y, delta t, and so on. So for the calculation at pp, we assume that the neighboring points have the corrections as zero. Okay, so not the actual pressures, but the corrections are zero. That is the central assumption. So now this is for one calculation, that is when we are calculating at P. When we are moving on, we are calculating at E, let's say. In that case, we take this P, we will take the northeast NE, the point at east of E, that is EE, and the points south of it, so south E. So while calculating that at E, we will assume that the corrections at these 4 points around it, these are zero. So earlier we had assumed that the pressure correction at E would be zero as well, but that doesn't mean that it remains zero. In another calculation, when we are calculating for E, then we will assume these other points to be zero, and so this affects the formula for calculation, but not the values itself. So assuming that the neighboring points have a pressure correction of zero doesn't mean that in the entire domain there would be pressure correction at one point only and all other points would have a correction of zero. That doesn't happen. In the formula only this change takes place, and we keep repeating this thing iteratively until we reach a converged solution where these u tilde and v tilde they satisfy a certain criterion. Which brings us to the last question of today's session. So in MAC algorithm, where does the pressure correction equation originate from? Does it originate from option A, the continuity equation, option B, the x momentum equation, option C, the y momentum equation, or option D, none of the above? So let's have a look at the correct solution. The correct solution is the continuity equation. So what happens is we know the values at un and vn, that is at the nth time level. Then using these we p as well. Then using those we calculate the uh, provisional velocities u tilde and v tilde, and these are expressed as a function of uh, p at n plus 1, and pn plus 1 minus pn is the pressure correction term p dash, let's say. And so what we do is we assume that the provisional velocities, they should satisfy the continuity equation. And okay, no, sorry. So and then again, using these provisional velocities, we find out the n plus 1th level u and v, and then this should satisfy the continuity equation. And these appear as a function of these u tilde, v tilde, and pressure correction. And so that's where so this should be 0. And if we plug in those values, that is un plus 1 and vn plus 1, then this gives rise to the uh, pressure correction equation, which is the Laplacian of P equal to rho over delta T into uh, del of u tilde, sorry. And the thing is, at convergence, this this del of u tilde, this should approach 0, as u tilde should satisfy the continuity equation. U tilde, v tilde both. This is, I'm considering a velocity vector sort of. So at that point, there won't be a pressure correction required as well. So until then, we will keep repeating the iterations where the pressure correction is still there, and that depends on the del of u tilde. So this is known as the pressure correction equation, this equation number 1, and that originates from the continuity equation. So option A would be the correct answer. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you.